So, this is a continuation of a video I've already posted. The video is Natural History of Thought. There are different approaches. It's very, very important to understand. You cannot talk about philosophy without an approach. You always have some approach. You always have some axe to grind. It is impossible to teach philosophy or history of thought, or even history of humanity from nowhere. You're always making choices. One choice that you could make is you could take these ideas, these religious texts that we're going to be reading, and you could take them seriously as religious truth. You could do that. That's a possibility. But this is something that we cannot do in this course because we have so many different revelations. We're going to look at the Vedas, we're going to look at the Upanishads, we're going to look at the Buddhist Jatakas, we're going to look at the Hebrew Bible, the Quran. I mean, somewhere over there's also Homer's Iliad. All of these claim to be truth from God. And all of these, at least on the surface, say different things. So for methodological reasons, we cannot treat them as true. We have to treat them as products of human mind, products of human history, products of human culture. In fact, it's an important point in our first couple assignments. This is one reason why we're reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, because you can see history is so important. History everything is the way it is because it got that way. And when I talk about history, there's biological history, and it's like, again, it is a choice. It is possible to teach a class like this and not thematize, not think about human beings as products of genes and think of humans as made of flesh and blood, made of chemicals ultimately, right? It's possible to teach a course like this, but I also think it's quite irresponsible. In the same fashion how in the 21st century, if you come to a doctor, can the doctor guarantee that the medicine will help? No. But the doctor has to go by best practice. The best practice in the 21st century says that there is no interesting difference between you and this thing. Mind is computation, right? And we have natural history of thought. How you have the story from the Big Bang, you have this blind, random evolution. How the ancients, like the Vedas we're going to talk about today, think that mind is superior to matter. Mind produces matter. This is not what we think today. Like in medical terms, this is not our best practice. In medical terms, our best practice is to think of the mind as being an effect of the body. And again, it's like in other videos you can watch, or in other courses I teach, I talk about the long scientific revolution from people like Buddha and Thales. From Thales, you could say, well, I mean, let's count Buddha in, why not? From Buddha and Thales to Copernicus, to Darwin, to Alan Turing. Alan Turing is famous for proposing a way to explain thinking as computation. Again, there's nothing mysterious in computers thinking. And Turing is going to say that there is no basic difference. There is no interesting difference between a human being and a computer. Human beings are more complicated, more complex. It's true. The human brain is far more powerful than any computer we have today. It's true. But it's a difference in quantity, not in quality. Anyway, so what I'm driving at is that we have a natural history of thought, natural history of ideas. Ideas appear as a result of history. And this history is biological, but also cultural. I talk about biological history elsewhere. Let me focus on the cultural history. So there's again, you have to understand, it's a battleground. People fight. And in a battleground, you cannot be neutral. You have to take sides. It's like, again, and refusal to take sides is helping somebody. So the old philosophy, especially going back to idealist philosophy in the Renaissance, Romanticism, let's talk about Romantic movement, imagined that there was this transition from the pre-axial to the axial age. So people like Karl Jaspers or Yehezkel Kaufmann, we'll talk about Kaufmann later when we get to Torah. I think they're interesting philosophers, and it's important to pay attention to their ideas, but I disagree very strongly with what they have to say. Kaufmann and Jaspers talk about how there used to be this pre-axial thought and then a transition to axial thought. From mythos to logos, from irrationality to reason, right? They will talk about how irrational, stupid polytheism was replaced gradually by humanity becoming more enlightened with a certain kind of monotheistic ideas. Very problematically, Jaspers seems to equate Socrates with Jesus, with Buddha, with Lao Tzu, with Confucius. I think it's a gross misreading, and in fact, it's a disrespect to Jesus and to Socrates to imagine that they are saying the same thing. At least not on the surface, they don't. Very patently. We'll talk about this down the line. So, it's like I want to question this transition from pre-axial to axial, and I want to question this narrative of some kind of progressive movement from polytheism to monotheism. Wonderful pedigree. Let me give you 3 names, 3 wonderful philosophers we'll talk about starting January. Machiavelli, Rousseau, and Nietzsche. All 3 thought that classical paganism was superior to Christianity. And Christianity, for Machiavelli, for Rousseau, and for Nietzsche, was a disease. And one of the reasons why the Roman Empire fell. Because people, instead of trying to take care of their earthly affairs, decided to think about, pie in the sky, paradise that's going to maybe come after you die, while the empire was falling apart. And the best minds, instead of trying to repair the empire, were praying for their soul, which, according to Machiavelli, Rousseau, and Nietzsche, does not exist. Is a myth told by the priests. Anyway, so a more interesting way for me of thinking about this is that we have a transition from hunter-gathering societies to urban societies. And this is something that your home assignment deals with, right? Urbanization, actually, and this is very important. Again, there is no neutral way of describing this. Either you say it's progressive and good, or you have to be attentive to the fact that there's power structures. Now, let's be very careful. I'm not trying to say all culture should burn. I'm not saying that. But, and in fact, this is what I have here. This is a very fruitful idea. We will be coming back to this like 10,000 times. You will see me draw this schema, right? So people like Hegel, Marx, and Nietzsche, Hegel, Marx, and Nietzsche are going to say that humanity has to grow. There are growing pains. You cannot just snap your fingers and choose to be healthy, choose to be evolved, right? So there are growing pains. So it means that on the road to Hegel would call this the Rechtsstaat, the end of history. Marx talks about communism very famously. Nietzsche talks about the Übermensch, the Superman, the Overman, the new kind of humanity that will emerge at the end of times, something like that. Basically, before we get there, we don't immediately automatically get there. There are growing pains, and these growing pains involve, social, cultural systems, like systems of human interaction, which are not consensual, which are abusive and exploitative. It is very important to realize when, as far as we can tell from the bones, the hunter-gatherers were tall, were strong, were healthy, lived long, and probably were much happier than the agriculturals. The agriculturals are weak and miserable for different reasons, biological reasons, reasons of food. Agricultural food is actually very poor compared to hunter-gatherer food. Again, it's a fact of paleontology. If you look at bones, if you start intellectual history not with books but with bones, I feel that you should start intellectual history with bones. But anyway, right? So, but why transition from hunter-gathering to agriculture? Jean-Jacques Rousseau has made the right guess, even though he doesn't know about paleontology, because the agriculturals win. They win. They have strength in numbers. Individually, they're weaker. Individually, they are unhappy and diseased, but there are more of them. And so in any battle before the invention of the machine gun at the Battle of Omdurman, the agriculturals will always win. So it's a very interesting situation. You could say it's a failed prisoner's dilemma. You could either live happy and healthy in the state of nature, run naked in the forest, or be much more efficient at war, but also be miserable. And the farmers will die, but the kings will also die. In fact, historians tell me that approximately 2/3 of newborn children, before the invention of antibiotics, approximately 2/3 of newborn children died before reaching the age of reproduction, mostly of smallpox and measles. And these are diseases, for interesting reasons I don't want to go into right now, uniquely associated with agriculture. It is because we had agriculture we have acquired those diseases. These diseases cannot survive in hunter-gathering populations. It's a very famous book by Jared Diamond called Guns, Germs, and Steel. You might have heard. It's a very interesting book where he, among other things, well, he talks about why the Europeans conquered the Americans and not the other way around, and this issue of diseases plays a part there. So what I'm driving at is that, come on, we're reading these texts. It is impossible to be blind to the fact that these texts mask exploitation. From the very beginning, you have the power of the priest and the power of the sword, and these two powers are related. And so, of course, you're going to have these wonderful stories about the Epic of Gilgamesh, how Gilgamesh is a nice, wise ruler, he's a good shepherd, and of course the people should obey him, and of course the people should pay taxes. Or, like we're going to talk about the Vedas today, in the Vedas, you have the macrocosm and the microcosm. You as an individual, and then you have a body, and then the universe has a body. And the body of the universe needs to be sustained, needs to be able to continue into the future. And who helps the world go round? Who are the most important people in the universe? Well, Karl Marx is going to say it's the farmers, because they produce the food, and without the food everybody dies. But that's not the official ideology. The official ideology is that the most important people are the priests. Now, nobility, of course, protects the priests, so they have this quid pro quo relationship, but at the end of the day it is the priests because they perform the sacrifices, because the sacrifices give this produce tapas or whatever, right? They produce the energy that helps the world to continue. And so you, as an individual farmer, yes, your life is suffering, but you'd better do your part. Suck it up, because you have your small part to play in this. You pay taxes to the temple, or you pay taxes to the noble. These are the taxes that sustain the universe, and don't you dare skip paying your taxes, because the universe is going to end. Horrible things like the flood that we talked about with Utnapishtim last time, right? So this is a situation of power. Now, of course, let me again, with Nietzsche, Hegel, and Marx, I don't just want to say, oh, it's bad, let's burn the books. That's not what I'm saying, okay? The idea is that it's growing pains, and we'd better understand this history, right? And only because there was this exploitation and alienation and whatever, right? Only because of this we have philosophy, we have culture. Because if we lived as hunter-gatherers, progress would be impossible. So progress, it's a complicated story. Some philosophers even today would say there's nothing redeeming in this. I'm not so extreme. I think that with Hegel, Marx, and Nietzsche, there's a promise of progress. Has it been realized yet is not clear. It's not clear if the promise has been realized. We're working towards this. But of the 8 billion people alive on planet Earth, I don't think that many of them will agree that they're living good lives. In fact, again, as paleontologists tell me, most people alive today would prefer to live as hunter-gatherers. So the promise of enlightenment, the promise of progress is still kind of a promise. Anyway, so let me talk about something so against Jaspers and Kaufmann, I want Marx, Nietzsche, and Foucault. And I want to say, I don't buy this pre-axial versus axial. What I want to say is that the real transition, and it's a transition which is ongoing. We have not finished this transition. Is from the teleological to the mechanistic worldview. The teleological worldview, the Greek word telos, means aim or purpose or goal. I apologize. Do you have to remember technical terminology? No. The point is that people used to explain the world in terms of purpose, intention, value. There was purpose and intention to everything. Why is it raining? Because the god of rain wants it to rain. Why are there eclipses? Because the gods are angry and they have blotted out the sun, right? And then you have a gradual transition towards abstract principles. And in this sense, polytheism and monotheism are both teleological. They are not very interestingly different, right? So polytheists have their many gods who are responsible for the sun and the moon and the rain, but monotheists have one god, but you still have purpose, intention, and value. Whereas the real scientific revolution, from Thales to Copernicus to Darwin to Turing, the real scientific revolution is to explain all purposes away. In fact, this is a complicated thought. Let's come back to this discussion in April. Will you be able to understand this thought? The thought is that you and I don't have purposes. It's not me speaking a language, it is language speaking through me. This is what the neuroscience tells us. This is also what the best social science, like Michel Foucault, is going to tell us. It's a complicated thought. We don't understand it very well yet. It's okay. But it's a preview. That's the idea. The transition from teleological to mechanistic. Now, let's talk about polytheism and monotheism in context of this transition. Now, I want to say that there are very important. I want to say mechanistic is superior. This is where we're going. This is the research program that we are pursuing. We're not there yet. Again, it's like explaining consciousness as computation is a very fruitful paradigm. There are billions of dollars spent today, daily, trying to understand brain as a machine, but it's not like we understand the brain completely as a machine. It's like you can isolate the COVID virus in a test tube, but it doesn't mean that you're going to have a vaccine tomorrow, and it doesn't mean that your vaccine is going to be free from side effects. So it's an ongoing project, but it's a project, right? So, but I want to say that I disagree with Jaspers and I disagree with Kaufmann because I do not just want to see this transition as progress. I want to say that something was lost in this transition and maybe we should pay attention to it. Again, Machiavelli thought that Christianity was a disease because it led to the collapse of the Roman Empire. Okay, that's Machiavelli's idea. I want to talk about something else. In the pre-axial worldview, there are very interesting ideas. Well, first of all, you have a very important element of impersonality, of abstract principles. You see, gods and humans are not particularly different. And in fact, both gods and humans are at the mercy of something greater. This is why you have concept of mana or magic, right? So through magic, you can force gods to do your bidding. Notice, in Christianity, in Islam, in Judaism, magic is blasphemy. Blasphemy. You cannot make God do things for you by some stupid spells, right? But in pre-axial polytheistic religions, you have, again, this impersonal so-called meta-divine realm. There is a unified, you see what I'm driving at? I'm saying that there are important elements in which polytheism is intellectually superior to monotheism. Polytheism is intellectually superior and closer to contemporary science than monotheism. Because the polytheists are going to say, look, there are laws which are impersonal and even above the will of the gods. Das ewige Schicksal, meine Herren und deine, says Prometheus to Zeus. There's eternal fate, which is my master and yours. Zeus, let me tell you a story, 5 seconds. Zeus, in the Iliad, has a favorite son. Zeus likes to sleep around. He has many children. By the way, notice, son of God? What does it mean, son of God? Son of God. Zeus has so many sons. Are you supposed to be special just because you're a son of God? You understand? Some of you may understand what I'm driving at. Anyway, so it's a side note. Go back a step. So Sarpedon is the son of Zeus, is a mortal son of Zeus. And Sarpedon is wounded. And Zeus wants to save Sarpedon. But somebody, I forget, probably Athene, intervenes and says, Zeus, you're not supposed to do this. You know it's against Sarpedon's fate. Ewige Schicksal, the eternal fate, the immortal fate, which is even above Zeus. Impersonal, blind, immortal, eternal fate. So again, this is like, we have laws of physics. Today we talk about laws of physics. And, it's like you can pray all you want, but prayers don't cure cancer. Or at least, I haven't seen the latest research, right? So it's like there are inexorable laws of the universe, or like the law of gravity, or let's say the standard model of particle physics has never been observed to be violated. Again, laws which are inviolable. This is what the science tells us. There's an equation and it's always followed. An equation which is like Einstein's field equations are always followed. We have never seen them be violated, no matter how much people pray. So, and in the same way, Zeus wants to save Sarpedon but cannot, right? I want to say, superior is a judgmental term, but this is something like, you don't have to agree with me. And in fact, if I'm right and we have this cultural war going on, you should not agree with me just because I say so. But you always have to ask for reasons and for arguments. But at least I want you to take what I say seriously, even if at the end you disagree with me. Because these names are pretty impressive names. Anyway, so element of impersonality. Second is, again, there is no interesting difference between humans and gods. In fact, humans can become gods, apotheosis. Or gods can do something horrible and be killed or be severely limited. And also, when you talk about morality, the polytheistic universe is amoral or immoral. You see, gods and humans seek power. They seek advantage. Why do the gods decide to destroy humans in the Utnapishtim story? Because the humans are too noisy. They don't let God sleep at night. This is not a moral reason. This is not a moral reason. It's just about power. It's just about advantage. Kaufmann is going to say, or Jaspers is going to say, well, look, but in the biblical story we have progress. Now it is only for human sins that God decides to destroy humanity. But I want to say, is that necessarily progress? Why? Why am I saying this? Because again, if you look at the beginning of the scientific revolution, if you look at, first science of human beings, starting with people like Thomas Hobbes, Hobbes is going to agree not with Jaspers. Hobbes is going to agree not with the Bible, but Hobbes is going to agree with the polytheists, with the pagans. Hobbes is going to agree with Utnapishtim. There's only power, there's only advantage, there's only desire. Whatever is the object of your desire is what you call good. Whatever is the object of your hate, you call evil. But there's nothing absolutely good or evil. This is what the sciences tell us, starting with people like Hobbes and Machiavelli, right? And in general, there's this idea that we have, again, the Lagrangian or the standard model of particle physics, and there are no values in the formulas. Again, Einstein's field equations don't have values, don't have objective values in them, right? And this is another way in which, by going back, by re-examining this story, we can maybe get some purchase. Now, of course, you could say, well, if polytheism is so superior, why did it lose? And yes, I feel sort of like, first of all, I'm not saying we should just go back to polytheism. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there are interesting, productive elements in polytheism, and something interesting may be gained by comparing polytheism to monotheism potentially favorably. This is point number one I'm making. Point number two I'm making is that probably in historical times, monotheism is just a much more efficient ideology. if gods are capricious and kill humans just for no reasons because humans are too loud, these are not very good gods. And you might not necessarily want to be very obedient to them. It is, notice, monotheism, I'm saying, wins not because it's truer, but because it's more efficient, because it makes more sense to people, monotheism, right? If something happens to you, that's because you're to blame. It's like in the book of Job, the friends of Job, you might have heard this story, Satan, just for fun, just to test Job's faith, afflicts him with various diseases, and his friends say, well, Job, God is merciful, God is all wise. If you got those diseases, probably you deserve them. Now, the premise of the story, of course, is that the writer of the Bible tells us, no, Job secretly was the most righteous person on earth, and this is just done as a test, right? But this is not what people think, and there's a kind of a moral in the story. But what I'm driving at ultimately is that, there's power in monotheism. It helps you mobilize resources. It helps you exploit your population more efficiently, right? But also it's like slaves obey your masters. Again, we cannot just take religion for granted, is what I'm saying. Well, part of the topic I'm pursuing, because it has been used to justify slavery and exploitation since forever. So maybe it is more efficient than polytheism. But it doesn't mean that it's truer, and also maybe it doesn't mean that we should stick with this kind of worldview in the 21st century. Again, I told my main specialization is as a political philosopher. And so actually, when I, feel free to look this up again, 16 lectures on Coursera, Introduction to Political Philosophy from beginning to end. So me talking about all these ideas in far greater detail. But my main idea of this course is that we understand ourselves better, and we understand our closest relatives, neighbors, people we love better, and we also understand society at large better if we adopt this mechanistic perspective. If we don't believe in immortal souls, but agree with Hobbes that, again, it's like from Hobbes before Nietzsche, we'll say God is dead. There are no values with capital V. Life has no transcendental meaning or purpose. So the only thing that you can do, in the words of Sigmund Freud, is to try to replace neurotic misery with ordinary human unhappiness. So Hobbes is going to say, come on. This is it's not like Hobbes doesn't believe in God. He's perfectly happy to believe in God. He just says he doesn't believe people who tell him about God. Because he knows that people can lie, people can be misled, people can be mad. So he says, I'm not going to trust human beings. And that's why Hobbes becomes effectively an agnostic. Effectively. Some controversy about that, but effectively he becomes an agnostic. And he's going to say, don't tell me about God. Don't tell me about capital V values. I don't know what are capital V values, but I know that every living thing wants pleasure and despises pain. And so you and me, we have common pleasures and we have common pains. For example, we all want to get over COVID. So as opposed to all this wonderful, beautiful picture, Hobbes wants to invent a social contract. He's going to say, come on, you have pleasures and pains, I have pleasures and pains. Let's take the pleasures that we have in common and let's try to build a more rational society, a more transparent society, which will not have to lie to itself, but will actually explain why people have to obey. Not to sustain the arbitrary power of the king or of the prince, but because, working together is in everybody's interest. This is from Hobbes, of course, later down the line to people like Adam Smith, and the idea of the invisible hand, that you selfishly doing what's good for you, and me selfishly doing what's good for me is actually the best thing for society. This is how the social welfare is going to be maximized. So this is a bit of a preview. Last thing I want to say, but this is very important. Do I want to disregard these texts? No. These texts are beautiful, and I want to read them with you. The Vedas, the Bible, the Tao Te Ching, right? Why? Because it's not like it's all ideology and indoctrination. You have the priests, yes, but you also have the ascetics. And occasionally, it's like it's impossible to censor everything. And people think, and people feel, and people try to express themselves at the best way they can. So in the Vedas, there's, I would say something is just about indoctrination, but there are also some deep ideas, deep reflection on the fate of society. And for example, in the ancient Hindu tradition, some priests, some religious leaders are happy to simply pay taxes. To simply sacrifices quid pro quo with the nobles. Are simply happy to work for the king. Some priests are simply happy to work for the king, but not all, because there are also the ascetics, and the kings don't like the ascetics very much because the ascetics don't want to pay taxes. They go out into the forest, they sit and they meditate, and they say to the king, "King, you are corrupt, and your laws are corrupt, and in fact your priests are corrupt, and all these plagues that you have are actually signs of divine wrath. So occasionally, there are some interesting insights. And how do you distinguish the useful from the indoctrination? That's a difficult task. That's why we're reading these texts. But like every step of the way, it's important. But let me again. I promised to finish. So let me give you like a brief preview, right? So we will talk about how in the classical Hindu religion, you were supposed to get, Hindu religion is not one thing, okay? It's not one thing, it's many different things, but there's a certain aspect, right? And the aspect is you're supposed to get good karma. By being a good person, you're getting good karma. But from the very beginning, there's this deeply subversive idea, and you will find this idea again and again in Buddhism, in Epicureanism, in Socrates maybe, right? The idea that, no, the right way to live is not to be a good person who accumulates good karma, but to be in control of your desires and to generate no karma, to not have karma at all, right? And ultimately, these would be the ideas of moksha, liberation, or nirvana in Buddhism, right? And this will have very important parallels in the Western tradition, especially with the notion of ataraxia in ancient Greece. Again, these wonderful meditative traditions, right? And in many ways, like I have to confess that what I'm doing in this class is not very meditative. Okay, I am passionately standing at the board, and I'm not sure this is what I should be doing with my life. Because one of the joys of actually teaching this course is an attempt to get in touch with this kind of tradition. This tradition, ascetic tradition, is also subversive vis-a-vis our society, because sit down and meditate. This is not what your parents want you to do. Your parents want you to be productive, to earn money, to get a good job. But sitting there and meditating, maybe it's good for your psyche, maybe it's going to make you less depressed, but it's also probably going to make you less productive. This is a deep rift, a deep internal conflict that I experienced myself. Because like if I spend the summer meditating, I'm not giving very good lectures in September. And like right now, these days, the choice that I make is that I'm unable to suppress my passion for teaching, and so instead of meditating and fasting, I spend my time during the summer preparing for the lectures. But this is, this is a part of the tradition, of this age-old tradition, especially, the ascetic tradition, with which I am very much to which I'm very much attentive, which I want to talk to. It's a strange thing to try to explain asceticism to students of such a prestigious university, to people. I apologize, I've used this phrase already many times, but let me use it again, to people who wear Gucci and drive Porsche, right? I'm trying to explain asceticism, right? But I feel that there's value in that, because in my experience, even if you wear Gucci and drive a Porsche, you can be deeply unhappy and deeply miserable. And unfortunately, year after year, I see, hopefully this is not about you. Hopefully this is about none of you. But every year I see students who are deeply depressed. So maybe secretly, maybe trying, again, this drive of efficiency for the sake of efficiency, maybe that's also a kind of an ideology that we should work against. So in this sense, and in fact, I feel that Marx and Nietzsche and Foucault have something to say about that, and we'll talk about this down the line. Okay, apologies, I've been going for too long, and maybe this was slightly less organized than I planned, but I hope it's more or less clear. And we're going to pause here, and I'm going to take your questions.